I don't think I kind of hesitate to just say they're going for the high risk, high reward strategies. I think they're only high risks because of their level of practice at this point, but we are already into the King's Rest, so let's get into that right now.
Not a problem. I like this kind of
You're
conversation.
on the floor, man. It's all good.
Yeah, but I want to watch these teams invis to the first room. This is exciting. Let's go.
I know,
Go
right?
away, Zyro.
As much as this like drives me insane seeing an invis potion used at the very beginning, it makes sense, but Eric already going down off the pulse, and make sure to get a quick res on him so they can get this ball rolling. MDI already starting up with their massive pull as they grab everything in the Golden Serpent's room up together. Huge damage going out onto Lighty, but he has stabilized quite well. You just look at his defensive bar, and every single button's been used.
Yeah, literally everything on cooldown. So he's just going to get out of dodge completely. Of course, that Necrotic Affix makes it so he really doesn't want to tank in there. He has to reset his debuff, which he has at this point, so he can go ahead and go back in with just the few remaining mobs. Of course, after they've been soothed by those hunter pets as well. Of course, Max doing the same thing on his side now, just completely getting out. He's not going to go down to the Quaking because, of course, it doesn't do damage to just yourself anymore. If that wasn't changed, he'd be a dead man. Definitely scary pulls up right off the bat here, but it looks like both teams are going to be able to deal with it relatively clean.
Yeah, and that's really what it's all about, is the tanks having the presence of mind of how long can they stay in there before they need to just get out of dodge and make sure that they line of sight the mobs that are casting on them, or just make sure they're in line of sight for the healer. You know, knowing the situation, knowing how much you can sustain yourself is always an absolute key importance. And even though we did see MDI start a little bit earlier, Complexity Limit's not far behind, as they're again following the same cookie cutter strategy that we've seen a number of times from these guilds.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember, like, the players from both of these teams, they know each other really well. 3 of the players on MDI are Complexity Limit Raiders, so these guys kind of have time to scout each other out. They talk during raid about what they're doing, so they really kind of know what the other team is really good at. So this is going to be really close just in sort of that aspect as well. But you have to remember, this is a big uphill battle for Complexity Limit. They are kind of the newer team to this, and just based off of time trial times as well, MDI has a much, much faster time in this dungeon. And when we asked them about what it was that made them so fast, they were kind of surprised. They were perplexed, like, we just played the dungeon really well. That's all they said they did.
We played the game.
Yeah, they just played the dungeon really well. That's all they said. It's like, well, you definitely did something more than that, because you absolutely trashed everyone else's time by over 2 minutes. So let's just see what it is they did here. Again, I'm kind of surprised. I want to see if they're going to get even close to their time trial time, which was a 17:41, which is pretty fast for King's Rest. It's one of the more impressive times I think we've seen in time trials.
Without a doubt. And we did see a 1930 run earlier in the tournament, though. They had a couple deaths. They had 3 obelisks with the last boss. So there's a little bit there. I'm not sure if they just grabbed 1 obelisk just to say, okay, we'll wait for that extra time. Ooh, Lighty getting clobbered as he was channeling the Miraculous Fang, but the damage, though, well worth it.
Yeah, and now we're seeing them go back just now to deal with those minions of Zul. We saw that death from Eric earlier on in the dungeon. I'm pretty sure that was him dealing with those minions of Zul before they went into the actual first boss room pulse. They don't have to worry about them at all. JB just now dealing with that as well, but he's not going to end up going down because they did deal with the first 2 of those animated guardians. Oh, and you can see that just now the rest of the minions of Zul will be, joining the rest of the group for them right now as they get on with the rest of the trash. And Twisted doing it as well. There were a couple minions as well for them as well, so I wonder.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. JB purposely got feared so that he wouldn't be fixated by the mobs, and the fixates would gravitate towards the other players, and then he would be, unencumbered, as he went to go fight the rest of the golems and bring them all in. So I like that a lot. It was, at first I was like, oh my gosh, like, why did he get feared? Like, why didn't he avoid it or something like that? And I was like, wait.
Did it on purpose? Wait a minute.
Just like the simulations.
Big brain. But because of the way they pulled it, because they had to wait for Eric's death and res at the start of the dungeon, they're just behind that res time plus death time as well. So they're probably a solid, let's say 15 to 20 seconds or so behind, and you can see that just based off of this gauntlet right now. Of course, everything is on a fixed timer here as well. Once you kill a trash pack, you have to wait 10-15 seconds for the next part of the gauntlet to spawn here. So they're going to be MDI on their side is going to be probably that 15-20 seconds fixed time ahead throughout this entire gauntlet portion of the dungeon.
That's right, and it's tough to be able to make up that extra time in this area specifically. So I think Machimba's room will definitely be the first of a couple break points that you have to watch for, right? I think it's tough to bless you. It's tough to be able to find those right situations where you'll be able to make up lost ground. I mean, we saw it in Toldagor with the Ethical series, where every single time they did the cannons just a bit faster than scripted content, they made up a little bit of ground, right? It's not always as easy to see whenever we're, watching different dungeons, but those are just some of the examples of the pulls that need to happen, the execution that needs to happen in order to gain up that lost ground.
Yeah, and, like we mentioned already, I'm not really sure. They're going to have to go for something crazy or just somehow have much higher level of execution because, as we know, like we already mentioned from the time trials, Method and it kind of seems like they've already got everything down pat just from the time trial time. So we have no reason to believe that they would, mess it up horribly in tournament play. We haven't seen them really mess up stuff in tournament play horribly in a very long time, I feel like.
Yeah, and that's one of the big, cues to the team and the skill and experience that kind of comes with it. And I'm always very interested to look at how teams start growing, developing versus the ones who have been around for such a long time. Just like with live keys, you'll see teams who've been around together since early on in the expansion. They've been around for multiple seasons playing together, and how much teams just grow exponentially over time. So very well played by Method NA just to be continuing on throughout this. Complexity limit, though, they need a bit of damage onto these mobs, but they're not terribly far behind.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of interested to see. I'm surprised to see them pull the obelisk here on the side of Method NA. This is not something that I would have expected them to do because we saw from the European region last week they went for the 4 obelisk pull, and that was even on Tyrannical. I wonder if it's just got to be the Necrotic that makes it a factor for the final boss that you don't want to pull for Guardians. I feel like it's probably something that's doable. It just increases the dangerousness of that pull by a lot. And of course, we're seeing Complexity Limit go for the same strategy, also pulling that obelisk as well.
I think it becomes a big challenge, especially when Raban ends up spawning throughout the final boss. Just being able to maintain aggro on that while you're running for your life to drop Necrotic stacks and deal with Tank Buster as well as all of the other mobs that are running around all over the place. Because even if you're having the Hunters taunting every single time, they're still going to be getting aggro back onto that. You only have so many taunts at your disposal, and if you're running away from, Raban, for example, you're running away from the boss, maintaining threat might be more of an issue, especially when you have to consider being in melee for Necrotic and you only have one reset.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a scary moment. Now yeah. You can see that. Yeah. And that's pretty true. And that's pretty true. But yeah, the first coffins have gone out, broken out of the sarcophagus for the side of Method NA. Of course, once that's happened, they can then engage the boss because they'll be able to finish off those constructs before they do their next entombs. Ooh, not quite actually. That entomb just okay. If they were able to feign death or shadow meld it off, that could have been scary if the entombs actually went off for them there. But they're able to avoid it just barely.
Doing quite a good job in Complexity Limit. This is where we wanted to start seeing them gain that ground. They're not far behind in terms of boss DPS, but it's always important to look at how much trash is left remaining, as they still have some of those constructs that they're chipping away at. They didn't focus them as quickly as we saw Method NA do.
They definitely didn't focus them down pretty much at all, and it looks like this Entomb cast might get off here. Didn't see if it did go off, but they instantly broke him out. Since there's only one alive, it's not really that big of a danger. You can just instantly break them out, like you're seeing them do just now. And no big deal for them. I don't want to say because they didn't focus them down, they actually ended up saving a lot of time. They were about 20 seconds behind for that entire gauntlet portion, and now they're only 5 or 6% behind on this Fortified boss. Yeah,
they're at a point where they can start catching up, and they're at a much more favorable position because being just slightly behind over time, just now looking at who can pump the most boss damage, which of the DKs was benefiting the most and was cranking up their single target the most. It seems like it was on the side of Complexity Limit right now because they are catching up in terms of boss HP and might be able to pull ahead at the last couple percentage. We'll see.
I mean, I'm eating my words right now. I said I don't really know where they're going to come back from in terms of playing the dungeon better, but it seems like they've somehow managed to play this middle section of the dungeon in Machimba's room better than Method NA has, definitely making up 20 seconds time difference. And you can look at the bosses now both going into single digits at the exact same times for both teams, and it looks like we're going to get a Machimba kill at the exact same time. Wow, I mean, dude, neck and neck getting into the second half of the dungeon. This is an exciting dungeon already.
You know what Max would say if he was here right now?
What would he say?
Pew, 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 and have his little finger guns out. Come on, counting them out. Good talk. We should do this more often. Next poll coming up, as we're going to be watching both these teams pretty much doing it in unison. As the Great Heroic Leap comes out, big spell reflect onto the caster to grab everything in together, and hey, it's the same thing. Are we watching the same team?
Deja vu all over again as both teams go for the same line of sight around the corner. Although it looks like the damage focus for Method and A is slightly better here. As the trash pack looks like it's going to go down quite a bit faster for them, whereas looks like Complexity Limit is going to have to kite this pull out a little bit because of that Necrotic. So yeah, a little bit of problems. The pull is going to last probably 15 seconds longer for Complexity Limit, and that kind of advantage that they re-secured for themselves in Machimba's room is getting lost here as Method and A is already in the third boss's room.
Method and A, okay, while we talked about Complexity Limit playing extremely well in Machimba's room, Method and A just decimated that trash pack. I like that they weren't really worrying about the caster mob either. They just ended up using Revival to dispel all the poisons. They're already at Kula the Butcher at this point, and I love that strategy of taking advantage of the pseudo super shroud, you could call it. Having one player running downstairs, activating the obelisk, and then having the rest of the group use that, rest of the group pull the boss. That way they'll be able to bring everybody out.
Yeah, both teams opting for that strategy. We saw Method and A going for that strategy yesterday, and it was the first time that we saw it run, and we see Complexity Limit doing the exact same thing here. Surprise, surprise, players from the same guild using the same strats. But again, I mean, both teams, even though we saw a little bit of difficulty in finishing off that pull on the platform, the single target damage from Complexity Limit here already kind of catching them up a little bit. Kula the Butcher was at around 45-50% when Complexity Limit engaged, so they were about 50% boss HP behind. Kula down to 30% by the time it goes down for Method and A, so Complexity Limit catching up just a little bit here in this first part of the Council boss.
That's right, there's a long encounter, and so it's just going to be boss damage, boss damage, boss damage, as both of these teams are taking on the Council of Tribes. Kula the Butcher going down for Complexity Limit, still around that 40-50% HP difference between the teams as we speak. Yeah, about 50% right now, as overall they've done a great job positioning the axes from Kula on both sides, so they're able just to occupy the middle of the room, and all those axes should be outside of the room's area at this point. I guess we'll be looking to see how each team will be able to handle Aka Ali at the very end, using Feigned Deaths, maybe even Transcend or something along those lines. Probably not Transcend, but probably the Feigned Deaths, to make sure their tanks will still be able to pump extra damage, even though they might have the Tank Buster debuff.
Yeah, with how close this matchup is, that might actually end up coming into account. Of course, we're talking about that resetting the boss's mechanics, or resetting the boss's cast sequence sort of ability that we saw that was premiered in the China region last year, where if you feign death enough of those charge fixates from the boss, he'll end up doing the debilitating backhand on the tank and then just continuing to barrel through afterwards. And if you're able to pull that off, your tank can stay in for the entire duration of the ability. First barrel through cast, feign death by Lip Hunt. Second one goes on Yoda here, which he will feign at the end of that cast. Then he should do the debilitating backhand right afterwards, but it doesn't matter because on another hunter he'll be able to feign death this one off as well, and they'll be able to have their tank stay in for maximum damage. Oh, feign death didn't come off, so not ideal for them. Not ideal.
It was close to coming back off at that point, but hey, Lighty's a god, and he just ends up parrying it anyway. So these things happen.
Did he parry it or dodge it? Where's Dratnos?
He parried it. Okay, I'm making an executive decision. He parried it.
I think I'll have to check with Dratnos on that one. I'm not too sure.
We'll ask Tettles. He'll probably know.
Okay, we'll ask Tettles. Same person.
Yeah. Basically.
But the single target damage here really squaring off here. Like we mentioned, Method and A was 50% ahead on that one boss. By the time Aka Ali goes down, the boss was at 20% for Complexity Limit. These boss kills are within 10 seconds, within 5 seconds, mind you, actually, for both teams. So still, at the end of this dungeon, it's incredibly close, and that one death timer might actually end up coming into account based off how close this is.
I really think that it will. At this point, it looks like Method and A is on their usual time trial sort of setup, whereas on the side of Complexity Limit, they're saying, okay, we need to start refining some of our strategies just a little bit more so that we can start catching up to Method and A's time. And right now, it looks like they're doing everything within their power to make sure that that happens, as mirror image pulls coming up back to back as we continue seeing more or less the same route coming out of both of these teams. It's just going to be coming down to group damage and execution to see who's going to take it.
Yeah, I mean, just this is absolutely as close as it gets right now. Once again, Complexity Limit just a few, just barely behind, 5 to 10 seconds behind. The execution and the DPS at the end of this dungeon is really going to be what makes or breaks the dungeon for both of these teams. There's not really a whole lot of dungeon left for them to make any mistakes.
Yeah, I like this move by Complexity Limit. They're getting all of the crowd controls up Those are hard CCs, they're not true CCs, so the hunters get aggro. They're going to need to feign death so they can drop the aggro that's on those mobs, and then they'll be able to move forward. It's not as fast as we're seeing as Method NA doing their skip, but again, it's just going to come down to that boss damage at the very end and how well these teams are going to execute on 3 obelisks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be scary, right? We know how difficult that multiple obelisk with the final boss is, especially in this dungeon in King's Rest. King Dazar can put out a lot of tank damage at the same time as the other awakened mobs. So, you know, if one of those blade combos goes off and your tank isn't properly prepared for it, or if you don't have a monk bubble for it, they could just go down. Both teams, however, do have multiple battle reses available and multiple misdirects in order to regain aggro on the tanks. But like we mentioned earlier, you know, one death could make or break this dungeon for either team.
It's also going to be extremely difficult when neither team really is going to be able to kill Raban, outright at least. If you think about it,
yeah,
they're going to have to take that additional risk if they want to make sure that they're going to be able to bring that down. And he's getting very, very low on that one. Got to make sure they're watching out for that. What was it? I think this is on EU week back in Legion. There were a couple times where tanks just ended up dying because the healer didn't heal them.
I feel, you know, playing with Lighty as much as I have played with him, I can guarantee you that was like a call. He's like, I will be fine with this feast to go down and get your mana. That's 100% a call that was made by him. That's just kind of the stuff that he does as a player. So just the kind of optimizations that these teams go through really lend themselves to that kind of strategy.
Yeah, no question. All right, Bloodlust going up. All the obelisks have been activated right now as this first game between Method NA and Complexity Limit in our upper finals is going to be decided by who is going to execute better, pump damage better into King Dazar and all of his surrounding minions. Shakib gets a bit of damage onto him by Raban, like we were talking about. Neither group can really afford to push any sort of damage into him. Max does get hit by the Dark Fury. Gotta be watching for that, but they do a great job of recovering. JV is excellent on mana as Twist has been burning about half of his pool at the moment. And right now, Method NA is in the driver's seat.
Yeah, definitely
very
in the driver's
narrowly.
seat. Yeah, just barely. They've just been barely ahead this entire second half of the dungeon. But what's really going to come into account, especially once Tazala comes out here, is going to be that focused single target damage from both of the teams, which we've already seen is very slightly higher from Complexity Limit. And this is going to be a complete DPS race down at the end here, as Complexity Limit is within 10% boss HP already here.
That's right. A lot of the hunters taking tons of damage to the side of Complexity, where Method NA is working on Sala as we speak. Hasn't spawned just yet on Limited side, it has right there. So at this point, they're dealing next to no damage to Raban. It's just all incidental cleave coming out. They gotta be very careful as Sala goes down for Method NA, and they are in a great position to be able to take this, but they gotta be able to stabilize the group here as Shakib's gonna get a huge Goomba Stomp of damage on him.
Yeah, that was a scary moment there. Lighty dropping below 25% HP from that blade combo, but barely being able to kept alive from JB. You can see that mana bar is now almost empty for JB. He really expended a lot of that mana here. But Tazala is now down for Complexity Limit as well, but they have a lot of work to get to make up here as King Dazar is below 30% for Method NA, and that's just a massive amount of HP difference between the two teams. And I don't think at this point Complexity Limit's going to be able to make it up. But man, I mean, what a first dungeon from these two teams. This is an absolute banger between the two.
Yeah, and it's great to see how close these players are, in relation to each other. Method NA did have such quicker movement throughout the dungeon, though. I think it really became apparent with how well they were able to just optimize their movement throughout. But Complexity Limit really improving on their time trial runs, improving their performance throughout the entirety of the tournament. So Method NA, game 1 to them.
Yep, that's going to put them one game away from sending Complexity Limit down to the lower bracket. This is an upper bracket match, so don't worry just yet. But yeah, well played by them. No deaths on the side of Method NA.